This is the 6th program in the Life on the Edge series, and it's all about risk assessment. Now, risk assessment might sound complicated, but it's really very simple. Look out for the hazards, work out what the consequences could be, and take steps to avoid them. Different situations mean taking different steps, and only you can know what's best. It really is your call from the moment you're given the job to the last moment you're in sight of the customer.
Better not to stand in the middle of the road. It's safer to stand on the curb. I'll have a look at the car, and if it's not repairable, I'll move it. Okay?
Risk assessment is something we all do, all the time, most of us without realising it. But this programme looks at risk assessment as a systematic process. It's packed with examples of best practice. But we also clearly identify some of the bad practices you might slip into. Risk assessment is difficult when situations can change from moment to moment. What seems like routine 1 minute can suddenly be very different. In this situation, you must consider traffic which is travelling in both directions. Your beacon can be clearly seen by traffic approaching from behind, but it's not so obvious for traffic coming from the opposite direction. By repositioning the recovery vehicle, we may be able to warn traffic from both directions of the hazard. When you get more used to doing risk assessments, you get into the rhythm of looking for the hazards, working out the consequences, and taking steps to avoid them. You might want to discuss how you'd have dealt with this situation yourself, or look at the leaflet that comes with the programme. So when you see this symbol, that means there's time to press the pause button. The risk assessment system is second nature. We do it every time we cross the road without even thinking about it. But you are at risk, and you do need to think about it. We've put a risk meter on the screen to give an idea of what level of risk is involved. We've added an extra meter to show how long each person is at risk. For some people, the length of time the road will be clear is crucial. The slower they move, the longer they'll be at risk. Some of us are in so much hurry, we don't bother about the risks. But for some people, the same risk is unacceptably high, either for themselves or for those they're responsible for. So the system is this. Assess the risks. In this situation, the chance of an accident can be quite high. Think through the consequences. With the traffic at this speed, just how serious would an accident be? And take steps to avoid these consequences. Keeping a good lookout means the risk comes down. Just as it's always risky crossing the road, it's always risky driving on the road. There's a certain level of risk for everyone, but the risk for roadside technicians is higher than that for the ordinary motorist. And that's simply because you're doing a job rather than driving from A to B. And as a professional, you're exposed to the risks at the roadside for longer. So every minute you're at work, your risk level never goes below a certain point. Everything in this programme assumes that you, your vehicle and your equipment conform to the industry's minimum safe working standards, set out in the BSI publication PAS 43, which promotes best practice. The scope of PAS 43 is extensive and includes vehicles, vehicle equipment, training and personal protective equipment. It's important that you use all your equipment correctly and that you've been properly trained to use it. The most basic part of your risk assessment is checking your vehicle is serviceable and fit for use. In particular, that its reflectors and beacons are clean and that all of the lights are working. Make sure you also check your own personal protective equipment to ensure it's complete. Some of the risk assessment has already been done for you by the organisation you work for. Under PAS 43, they've already assessed what types of work you'll be involved with and produced appropriate standard operating procedures. That includes things like how to report defects on your vehicle or how to park at the scene of a breakdown or recovery. But it's down to you to know these procedures inside out. Risk assessment starts from the moment the call is taken.
So your car's juddering? Okay, fine.
It's vital that customers are given advice about safety right from the start of the job.
You need to consider whether you'd be safer out of the vehicle. You're the best person to decide, but we recommend you getting out of the car on the passenger side and standing on the verge as far away from the traffic as you can. We'll get to you as soon as possible.
After you've been given the job, there's always 3 different options on where to pull up at the scene: behind, in front, or at the side. Obviously, on a motorway, there's only 2 options: in front or behind. The more precise the information you get, the quicker you'll find the customer. Getting an accurate location is just as important as being in the right vehicle for the job. From now on, you'll hear the risk assessment that each technician makes as they do each job. At the same time, watch how that risk meter goes up and down accordingly.
I need to consider my safety first, and then the customer. If it wasn't for the centre console in my vehicle, I'd get out on the near side. She's much safer standing at the back of her car than actually sitting in the car, as long as she's keeping on the near side. Now I need to consider if she's still safe. I've turned my wheels to the left, and I always leave at least 80 metres when I park up. It's simple enough to take these actions, and that's going to reduce the risks.
The risk assessment process is a loop you constantly go around: hazards, consequences, avoidance, and then back to hazards again to check nothing's changed. With a gap of 18 metres or more, a glancing blow will push the recovery vehicle forwards and to the side. At 12 metres, the consequences of the same blow could well mean that both you and the customer are badly injured. At 6 metres, if you're working under the bonnet or under the car itself, you've got very little chance of escaping serious injury or even death. So it only takes a tiny change in the circumstances for the risk level to rise considerably, and that's why you have to take charge at the scene.
I've explained what the problem was and how to rejoin the traffic. She can't get in on the near side because of the console in her car, so my risk assessment says to guide her down to the offside and then keep a lookout for her. I've explained how to get back onto the carriageway as safe as possible. If I'd have been parked in front, I'd have got her to follow me. And also, I'd like to make sure she rejoins the traffic safely before I leave.
If the information you're given is wrong or incomplete, then that can increase the risks to you and the customer.
This job was passed to me as a straightforward recovery. Puncture, no spare. But it's on the offside, and I didn't know he'd tried to change it himself.
Since the casualty doesn't have a serviceable spare, it could mean sending a transporter instead of a service van. And it also means the risks are different.
My risk assessment is that I need to give advance warning to oncoming motorists. So, I'm going to sit out my cones.
A small change in the situation can mean you make a very different assessment of the risks. For example, a flat tyre on the near side has a lower risk level compared to a flat tyre on the offside. On the offside, you might need a recovery vehicle to move the car somewhere safer, especially if it doesn't have a serviceable spare. There's no difference in the risk for an offside front or an offside rear, but it could still make the difference between sending a spec lift or a transporter. And getting the right vehicle there first time cuts down how long the customer is at risk waiting at the side of the road. Just because the situation's familiar, it doesn't mean it can't suddenly become dangerous. There's probably less than a metre between your vehicle and the oncoming traffic. With a passing truck, that comes down to half a metre, and that's close enough for the slipstream to suck you into its side. Remember, trucks can wander even closer than that towards the rumble strip and the hard shoulder. It's up to you whether you use cones, but if you do, let's look at them from the point of view of an oncoming truck. He's high up, he's got a clear view of the scene whether you use cones or not. But what about that truck following close behind in his slipstream? The first he knows about anything on the hard shoulder is when he sees your cones. Our simulation shows the two trucks travelling at 56 miles an hour, but if they were light commercial vehicles, they could be doing nearer 70. It's very easy for a routine job to become one that you'll remember forever, for all the wrong reasons.
He's right where I thought he'd be, but he's parked very close to the barrier. Because he's on a bridge, there's no room for me to walk safely down the near side with my equipment. In my risk assessment, anything on the hard shoulder that's within half a metre of the white line has a very high risk of being struck by oncoming traffic. And that includes me.
With this type of incident, often you'll find the police will call out a recovery operator for a straight recovery, just to get the casualty out of the danger area. Regardless of the fault, the safest way of dealing with this isn't with a service van, but with an underlift. When the risk is unacceptable, you have to be able to make that judgment and stick to it. It's your call. Don't try and do the job before that help you need arrives. Every situation is different, but the principles of risk assessment always apply. Spot the hazards, think through the consequences, take action to avoid them, and keep a constant eye out for new hazards.
The traffic's late, but it's quite slow moving. I still want to get the casualty out of here quickly because there's no hard shoulder. Although his hazard flashes are on, they're only just working. His battery must nearly be flat. I've already seen cars that haven't realised the van is broken down, and they've had to move into the other lane quickly to get past it. It's a tricky one, and if the traffic was heavier, I'd consider calling the police for assistance. As it's a high-top van, that's a problem when you're loading it onto the spec frame, because it obscures most of the beacons on the recovery vehicle. So, I'll park up behind and put out my cones. That'll give a clear signal that the van's broken down.
Cones are optional equipment, but if you use them, make sure you do it correctly and that you're using the right size of cone for the job. If you're carrying cones, then your risk assessment will change to take into account that you can use them. You need to be extra careful here because you're coning on the live lane. It takes time to set out cones, but once you've done it, it's safer while you're working. And if a cone is hit, the noise it makes might just alert you or the motorist in time to avoid trouble. You might think the risk without cones is so high that it's unacceptable, but it depends on the individual circumstances. This situation could be even more dangerous than we've shown. If the road didn't have a speed restriction, then vehicles could be heading for the back of that broken down van at 70 miles an hour or more. The high top on the van makes it even more dangerous. Once you've moved to the front to recover it, the high top will obscure your beacons. When you use cones on a dual carriageway, the way you set them out depends on the speed limit. The faster the traffic, the longer the taper to give them enough warning at the higher speeds. If the cones weren't there, this is what's happening as the traffic changes lanes. And any incident will occur very close to where you're working. We've assumed that visibility is good, but what if there's bright sunshine dazzling the oncoming drivers? Or if visibility is reduced by rain or fog? Or if, like our original recovery of the high-top van, you're working at night? There's one more principle to take into account about risk. It's not to do with how likely something is to happen, but how serious the consequences are. One way of thinking about hazards and consequences is this. You might bet £1 on the flip of a coin. The hazard is that you run the risk of losing, but the consequences are very small. You only lose £1. But if you bet £10,000 on the same flip of a coin, the hazard is the same. You have exactly the same chance of losing the bet. However, you might not want to take the consequences of losing £10,000. The risk of an accident happening in particular circumstances might be quite small, but think through the consequences. They might vary from the chance of getting a cut finger to the chance of a fatality. Don't forget, you can call for assistance from a colleague, or if you believe the circumstances are life-threatening, you can ask the police for help. But there are some situations where your risk assessment might be evenly balanced between two different ways of doing things. Do you opt for cones, or do you pick up and run because it's so much quicker? To help you decide, think through what this situation looks like from the oncoming motorist's point of view. Doing that as thoroughly as possible can make all the difference to your risk assessment and your personal safety. Some situations are just accidents waiting to happen, and the longer the casualty is there, the more likely there'll be an accident.
They told me it was on the roundabout, but they didn't say it was actually in the middle of the roundabout itself. So I need to go right round to do my risk assessment and take into account the whole area.
Deciding whether to go for a fix or whether to go for a pickup depends very much on the fault. Because of the number of roads joining the roundabout, you have to remember that traffic isn't just coming at you from behind, it's coming from the side as well. You need to assess everything thoroughly before you stop. Better to go all the way round again rather than pull up in the wrong place.
The traffic's really slow here, so not much risk for me or any other motorist. There's the casualty, but the trouble is it's the clutch, so I definitely need to recover it. I have to park close to it to do the job, but it's okay to park alongside because the traffic can still get past me. It's still very quiet, but I'm still thinking through the risk assessment, hazards, consequences, avoidance, and then back to reassessing the hazards, checking nothing's changed. It's all straightforward so far, but it can change any time. I did everything right, but there's no accounting for what other people might do. And now it looks as though it's my fault.
You're the real guy doing this. You've got better things to do than staying here all day.
That bloke only gone to the post office would have been alright, you know?
Every situation is different, and the normal everyday fix or recovery can quickly become dangerous or unpredictable unless you constantly revise your risk assessment as you're doing the job. And if that customer's in a hurry, the risk of you making a mistake or cutting a corner can be significantly higher. How many potential accidents can you spot in the next 2 recoveries? Frequently, the risks become unacceptable. Bear in mind the bad practices you're seeing weren't being done for real, they're only role play.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. What I'll do is I'll slide the bed down and I'll get you to drive it straight up. That's it, mate. Quick on up. All right, hold it there then, hold it. Oh, I think I'll winch it.
All right.
And drop it back down. I'll do there. You just sit in and steer it up, mate.
Yeah, okay, yeah, cheers.
Steer it over that way, please, mate. All right, that's a lovely job.
All right.
I'll slide the bed up.
Yeah, cheers. No.
Yeah, hold it here, mate. Hold on to it. Hold on to it, you got it? I'll just put a strap on it, mate.
All right. There you go, mate.
All right, is anyone there, or should I just drop it straight there?
Yeah, somebody there, yeah.
All right, lovely. Oh,
Yeah.
watch your back.
All right, mate.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, cheers now.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. Yeah, I'll just let you arrive now. Okay, I suppose it's going to.
Chuck him out.
Hello? Yeah. Sitting still. Put the key in. Go on, right over this way. Over this way. Jump out.
What, round this side? Yeah, fine.
The circumstances of every job are different, and there's a very fine line between getting it right and getting it wrong. It's your safety that's paramount, and closely after that, it's the customer's safety that's vital, and of course, the safety of other road users. Risk assessment means being aware of the hazards, thinking through all of the consequences, taking steps to make sure an accident is avoided, and doing this over and over again as the circumstances change. Risk assessment is the right tool for a very demanding job. The only person who knows the safest thing to do in each situation is you. It's you who's on the spot, and it's your call.